Hey, what's up everyone? My name is Drake, and today we're going to be talking about reading. You may have heard me mention before that my family's owned child care centers since before I was born, and because of that, I have taken a lot of early learning courses and early learning tests, and I'm pretty much aware of most, if not all, of what early learning educators have available to them as far as their training and the information and knowledge that they have. I've also done a lot of research on my own because I'm a bit of a nerd. But I think if you ask anyone, or at least most people, they'll tell you that reading is a vital skill and it's very important. And I would agree with them. But also most people think that virtually everyone can read, and that's just not the case. I was just watching an interview with Dr. Phil not too long ago where he's talking about how 130 million Americans cannot read at the most basic level. That's huge. And he defined basic level as not being able to read a prescription or not being able to read a bedtime story to their kids. That's pretty scary. The other thing was New York Times just put out an article not too long ago stating that only 30% of students are reading at grade level. That is a big deal. That means that the vast majority, 2/3, are not reading at grade level. So that would kind of fly in the face of most people can read, right? Well, let's take this back. Why is reading so important? Well, for a lot of different reasons, but reading is just one way in which we can express ourselves, reading and writing. If you're not able to read, you're not able to get a lot of information in one of the most basic ways, one of the most fundamental ways. If you look at reading, it's really just about pattern recognition. That's what reading is in its most basic form. And pattern recognition is learning. And so if you are not able to have effective pattern recognition, you're not able to learn. Because in order to learn, you have to be able to recognize a pattern and then choose an appropriate response for that pattern. That's what learning is. So reading is just one of the very basics in pattern recognition. Now, I've talked to a lot of parents and heard a lot of different arguments. I've talked to a lot of parents who they are frustrated with trying to learn reading or teach reading to their kids. And that's because they're using an outdated method. It's kind of like this. Here's first off, one of the reasons why reading is valuable. If I asked you to repeat back to me, if I gave you a list of 50 names and I want you to repeat them back to me exactly in order, and you just have to do it from memory, that's a big burden on your memory. If I ask you to remember a grocery list with 50 items, and then you go to the grocery store and you don't have a list written down, you just have to remember it from memory, that's gonna be kind of challenging, especially if there's been a long time since you left the house and then went to the store and then came back, right? And so reading is valuable for those reasons. Being able to read, being able to write. If you wanna take notes for yourself, if you want to store information, it's a great way to store information outside of yourself, right? If you just rely solely on your memory, you're putting a big burden on your memory. And what's going to happen is you're going to be filling up your memory with a lot of information, and at some point, you're either going to have to boot some information out, or you're not going to be able to allow any new information in, right? So that's just one reason why reading and writing is so valuable. If you can't read, you're not going to be able to write either. You've seen kids, they draw these beautiful pictures and you look at them and you're like, what is it? And then they tell you, right? They can express it to you. Well, what happens years later when you've got that same picture that you put on the refrigerator or you put it in some sort of scrapbook and you bring it out and you say, you remember this? They look at it and they go, I don't know what that is. But when you write something and you use letters and words, right, it still has value long after you've written it. It still represents the same thing, right? The same meaning, the same word. And that's really important for look at our history. Look at our history as a species within our progression of communication. We've gone from just speaking and expressing things verbally to not just expressing things verbally, but also writing things, using at first pictographs or hieroglyphics, that sort of thing, right? And then moving on to what we now use as letters and words, and even more advanced, we can send a text right away. We can send an email right away. We can read books, entire books full of information, right? Where you can just find out an entire message, an entire concept. You can really dive in, an entire story, right? Where it doesn't have to be, someone has to remember every aspect of the story word for word and pass it on, and then you have to keep going back to that person and just rely on that one person or that source in order to get this information. But you're able to read it yourself at your own pace, right? Another thing is, I was starting to say how parents get frustrated with teaching their kids reading, and a lot of parents will hold back on teaching their kids reading and they'll wait till much later. And that's a big mistake. That's a big mistake because you're what you're doing is you're allowing that child to pass out of that phase where they would learn using their natural learning ability, and it's gonna make it way more difficult. You've heard that kids, their brains are like sponges. They can absorb so much more as a young child versus when you become an adult, right? Well, it's kind of like, imagine teaching your kid to walk when they're 7, not allowing them to make their mistakes as a toddler, at 1 or whatever, and fall and get up and really stabilize themselves, but waiting till they're 7, keeping them strapped down and then going, okay, now get up, go for a run, right? And I think the reason why parents get that frustration is because they're using outdated methods to teach their kids to read, right? It's sort of like if you had, let's say, if you were going grocery shopping, right? And you're like, it is difficult to walk to the grocery store and then carry all my groceries in my hand and walk all the way back home. That is so challenging. Yeah, of course, it's called using a car, duh, right? So there is a method that I use with my students, and I will use with my future children, which is super simple, gets amazing, massive results. And if you don't know about it, you should learn about it. It's called Technotutor, right? But let's see, what else did I have written down here? Oh, look, here's another reason why reading is so valuable, because you can write things down and keep yourself organized. That's huge. That is absolutely key. If you think about it, if you want to hide something from someone and they don't know how to read, you could just write it. You could put it in a book and you can just pass it right under their nose. They're never gonna know. They're missing out on that ability for themselves. Also think about this. Sometimes people say, well, look, we're entering into this new age where people have the ability to ask their phone, ask Siri to do something for you, or read something for you. Ask an AI to do something for you. Okay, that's true, that's fine. However, you're gonna have to rely on your auditory processing, or you're gonna have to learn things either through YouTube, watching a video, hearing something, right? And first off, that is much slower than you being able to read it effectively. Just a side note there. But also, you're relying on this AI, right? Guess what? The AI requires a code. It's reading, it's able to read. And so what happens when you don't have access to the internet? What happens when you don't have access to technology like that? Then what do? Because you're going to be basically at the whim of the technology. You're gonna be relying upon that technology to figure things out for you, right? And here's another thing. If you're not teaching your kids to excel, to really be able to read effectively beyond what is the status quo, then you're not teaching them anything outside the system. You're teaching them to be inferior to the system. They're gonna be lesser than the system, and they're never going to be able to escape this system. When you read, and you're reading effectively, you're able to actually process more information in a smaller, shorter amount of time. You're able to read faster than somebody can speak. That's huge, that's vital, that's important, because the faster that you can process information, the more information you can gather in that amount of time, which means the better understanding that you can actually have of that subject. This is the big gripe with phonics, right? The time that it takes for you to sound out a letter, you're missing out on understanding that word. The time that it takes for you to sound out the word onyx, onyx, onyx. I don't know how you're gonna get to phonics from there, right? But the time that it takes for you to sound all that out, you're missing out on the understanding and the meaning of the word itself. And the longer it takes for you to do that, the less capacity you have to actually understand the sentence and the message, the entire concept, right? And so even listening to somebody, it's a slower process than reading it yourself. That's not to say there's no value in listening to somebody lecture or anything like that. That's important, right? But it's also important for you to be able to gather the information yourself and organize that information, organize yourself, organize your thoughts. That's what reading and writing allows for you to do. Another important note here is the elite. The elite are able to read exceptionally well. And because of that, they're able to organize information and organize thoughts and organize people and organize businesses, all those sorts of things. And that's contributing to why they're in the position that they're in. If you want to see a change in the world at all, and if you've watched any of my other videos, you know clearly I do, right? I'm here to create a world that is best for all of us. And if you have a gripe with the elite, if you have a gripe with the system, if you don't like how things are done, you want things to be changed, you're going to have to take that responsibility to change it. But if you cannot do the things that they do, you're going to be inferior to them, essentially. You're going to have to rely on them to do a lot of different things. You're not going to be able to take advantage or take responsibility of the things that they're doing so that we can change things over to a better way of doing things. If you are reading, or if you're not reading, you have to remember entire stories on your own. However, if you just know the words, you don't have to remember the entire story. You can just read the words and get the message together. It works every single time. It's just like what I was saying before with a kid drawing a picture or scribbling a make-believe note, right? You ever see when the kids scribble like a make-believe note? It's just a bunch of scribbles and they say, it says, I love you, mommy. I love you, daddy, right? And then later you come up to them and you say, hey, what does it say? They say, it says, I like the birds outside, right? It changes its entire meaning, right? Well, if you are actually writing words and you know those words, you can read them, you can recognize them, it's the same message every single time. And whenever you go to read something, that message will be the same. And you can share that message with other people. Other people can read your message. You can write instructions. You can read instructions. If you do not have that capability to read, guess what? You've lost the technology of the phone, the computer, a lot of other things as well, right? Think about this. How many people don't know how to create a battery, right? And so if all the batteries, for whatever reason, if all the technology were to get fried today, and you had to make a new technology, and you had to do it based off of just your memory, whoa, that would be really tough. But if you could find a book, and in that book it says how to create a battery, wow, you're at a massive advantage there, right? So reading gives you a huge advantage. The other thing is this, AI is here. We used to say it's coming, it's here now, right? And if you're not able to read, if you're not able to communicate with an AI like ChatGPT or Midjourney or DALL-E 2 or all the other AIs out there, right? I'm just naming some of the big, really popular ones right now. If you're not able to communicate with them, you're at a disadvantage because somebody else is communicating with them very effectively and they're using it to scale their business, to make a lot of money, to capture as much market share as they possibly can. And we've seen the trend. When people capture market share, they don't tend to give it up, right? And so if you're not able to read, guess what? You're left out, unfortunately. These are all the reasons why reading is so important. Whether you have your child in school or you're homeschooling, it is an advantage to start your child early and effectively with reading. If they find reading to be painful or boring or aversive, it's hard for them, then they're not going to read very well, they're not going to practice their reading, and they're going to be at a disadvantage, right? And so I implore you to actually support your child to read effectively from a young age so that they can go on to do way more, very many things that are creative and beautiful, and not have to be focused on just trying to get past the barrier of learning, right? It's kind of the same argument that I make for why we should create a world that's best for all. And that's basically everyone having their basic needs met. Why that's so important is because then we can go on to do way more creative things in our reality. But at the moment, 99% of people are living on less than $34,000 a year, right? And so if we can get everybody clean drinking water, nutritious food, a shelter, sanitation, so they're not defecating where they sleep, right? And just overall good health, security, and great education, then we can do way more together as humanity, as society, than we've done in the last thousands of years, right? So get your kid reading. If you are having a frustration at all with your child reading, send me a message that says read, and we can start working on getting your kid to be as effective as they possibly can too. See you guys.